This kid had a reputation that preceded him everywhere he went. He was the troublemaker voted most likely to end up in prison in the yearbook, though nobody took that prediction entirely seriously at the time. He had a kind of energy that drew attention wherever he went. Mostly the wrong kind. He tried to fight teachers, bullied people at random, and generally existed in a constant state of friction with the world. He seemed like a person who thrived on chaos, a storm that needed no provocation. Most of the time, people either avoided him or walked on eggshells around him, hoping not to be the target of whatever explosive temper or reckless stunt he had in store that day. It was my school's first ever computing class, and the lab was brand new. Gleaming rows of computers, crisp white walls, the faint smell of fresh electronics and polish. The excitement in the air was palpable. For some of us, it was the first time we had access to proper machines for programming practice. And yet, somehow, this kid, who, as far as I could tell, was barely scraping by in most of his other classes, was enrolled in it. I never found out why. Maybe the administration figured a hands-on, technical class would channel his energy, or maybe there was just a scheduling quirk. Whatever the reason, he was there and he was assigned to sit next to me. I didn't care. School bullies were low on my list of priorities. I had my own rhythm, my own focus, and I wasn't interested in engaging with someone else's reputation. The first few classes, I expected the usual chaos, the loud interruptions, the eye-rolling gestures toward the teacher. But he surprised me. He was quiet. He took notes diligently. He tried. He really tried. And then I noticed the frustration. It started subtle. Tightening of his jaw, tapping the pencil nervously, muttering under his breath. But it grew week by week. He would raise his hand during lessons, only for the teacher to brush past him or answer so briefly that he didn't actually get the help he needed. Once the rest of the class had understood a concept, the teacher would move on, leaving him behind. His notebook sometimes looked like a battlefield of scribbled attempts and half-finished exercises. A few weeks in, I realized he was trying to peek at my work during programming exercises. At first, I didn't know what to think. I glanced at his screen once and immediately saw what he'd done wrong. Without a word, I slid my notebook a little closer and tapped the section he needed. He looked at it, nodded slightly, and went back to work. No thanks were exchanged, no small talk. Just a silent acknowledgement of what he needed and what I could give. Over time, I began to understand him better. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't unintelligent. In fact, he was quite smart. The problem was that the way our teacher taught didn't suit him at all. There was something about processing information in real time or following verbal instructions that didn't click for him the way it clicked for others. Whatever it was, some kind of learning disability, I eventually realized, made it hard for him to keep pace in a classroom designed for average learners. But when he could slow down and focus on a concept one way at a time, he could grasp it. He just needed the right explanations. And that's where I came in. For the rest of that year, if he had questions, he asked me. I have a strange, almost compulsive ability to explain a single idea 6 different ways until someone truly understands it. And I did. Quietly, patiently, over and over, I would take a problem, break it down differently, use analogies, diagrams, little step-by-step processes, anything I could think of. Sometimes he would sit there, staring at the screen, hands frozen on the keyboard, until it clicked. And when it clicked, there was this brief, almost imperceptible smile of relief and pride. We never spoke outside of class. I never knew his name beyond the roll call, never invited him to anything, never saw him in the hallway. Our interactions existed entirely within the confines of that classroom, in that strange, focused bubble where learning was difficult, frustrating, and sometimes magical. He trusted me enough to ask questions, and I trusted him enough to answer without judgment, without ego, without anyone else noticing. I don't know what became of him. I have no idea where he is now, whether he followed a conventional path or took the chaotic one everyone predicted for him. But I remember the final day of class vividly. The teacher, who had been mostly indifferent and occasionally frustrating, stood at the front and announced that the whole class had passed. Every single one of us. I watched him pack his things, a small, quiet satisfaction in the way he moved, the same way I felt when I saw a program finally run correctly after hours of frustration. That year, I learned something unexpected. that people's reputations are rarely the full story, that intelligence comes in many forms, and that sometimes a little patience and attention can unlock potential that no one else sees. He never thanked me, never acknowledged it, but that didn't matter. For that 1 year, in that one classroom, we had each other's backs in a way no one else could understand. And that, in itself, was enough. This happened back when I was in elementary school, and to this day it's still one of the most absurd things I've ever witnessed unfold in real time. We had this teacher who was universally loved because she ran a reward system that actually worked. Every week she had this huge assortment of goodies, candy, small toys, stickers, little trinkets, laid out on her desk. You didn't just walk up and grab something, though. She ran it like a raffle. If you behaved well, did your work, didn't cause problems, you earned tickets. The better you were, the more tickets you had in the drawing. At the end of the week, she'd randomly pick names and those students got to choose a prize. It was simple, fair, and it motivated even the troublemakers to at least try. Enter this one kid. Everyone knew him. Every class has that kid, and he was ours. Constantly disruptive, always pushing boundaries, always convinced he was smarter than everyone else. He barely ever earned tickets, which meant he almost never won anything. This fact clearly ate at him. One afternoon, right before dismissal, the teacher noticed something was off. A couple items from her goodies stash were missing, and she knew she hadn't given them out yet. She calmly asked the class if anyone knew what happened. Silence. Then someone quietly pointed out that they'd seen this kid hovering around her desk earlier. She didn't accuse him right away. She just asked him to stay after class. That's when everything went sideways. The moment she suggested he might have taken something without permission, he absolutely lost it. Full-on meltdown. Crying, red face, snot, the whole deal. He kept repeating that it wasn't him, that everyone was lying, that the teacher hated him. It was uncomfortable for everyone in the room. Eventually, through sobs, he asked if he could go to the bathroom to calm down. The teacher agreed, thinking it would de-escalate things. He never came back. At first, no one thought much of it. Kids sometimes take a while, but after 15 minutes passed, then 20, the teacher started getting uneasy. She checked the bathroom sign-out sheet, a sheet where we had to write our name, destination, and time whenever we left the classroom. Under timeout, he had written, "Never coming back." That's when the mood in the room completely changed. One of the teachers went to check the bathroom. Empty. No kid. No sounds. Nothing. The teacher immediately went to the principal and explained everything. Suspected theft, emotional breakdown, ominous message, missing student. Within minutes, the school went into full panic mode. Lockdown procedures were discussed. Parents were being contacted. Then the police showed up. Not just one officer either. Multiple squad cars. And yes, there was even a helicopter circling overhead. From a kid's perspective, it was surreal. We're sitting in class watching shadows pass over the windows, whispering to each other, wondering if we just witnessed the start of some true crime documentary. After what felt like forever, they found him. Turns out he'd just decided to walk home. No plan. No destination beyond away. Just grabbed his backpack and left school grounds like he was clocking out of a job. The police picked him up a few streets away, completely unharmed. The fallout afterward was massive. Meetings, disciplinary action, parents furious, the whole deal. All because he couldn't handle getting caught stealing candy. And honestly, that wasn't even his only moment. Years later, we remembered another incident involving the same kid back in 5th grade. One day, he brought a shoebox to school for absolutely no reason. He went around whispering to classmates that it contained a uranium bomb. Not a joke. Not sarcasm. He genuinely seemed to think this made him interesting. Obviously, nobody believed him. It was painfully clear he had no idea what uranium even was. But someone reported it anyway. The teacher didn't take chances. He was immediately escorted to the principal's office. The box was confiscated, and the school treated it as a bomb threat. Police got involved again. He ended up in serious trouble, all because he wanted attention. Looking back, it's wild how much chaos one kid managed to cause over the years. At the time, it was terrifying. Now, it's one of those stories that sounds completely fake until multiple people confirm, yeah, That actually happened. Back in high school, there was this one kid who, to this day, I still don't think was entirely human. Every school has quiet kids, shy kids, awkward kids, the ones who keep their head down and don't say much. This guy was on an entirely different level. I spent all 4 years of high school in the same class as him, and I can count on one hand the total number of words I ever heard him say. Okay, sure, bye. That was it. No jokes, no complaints, no small talk, no reactions, no emotion. If someone asked him a yes or no question, you'd get a one-word response. If someone tried to start an actual conversation, he'd either nod or stare straight ahead like you weren't there. First, everyone thought something was wrong, like seriously wrong. We assumed he was depressed or had crippling social anxiety or was going through something at home. People tried to include him. We invited him to sit with us, asked about his hobbies, even tried dumb icebreakers. Nothing worked. He wasn't rude. Exactly, he'd acknowledge you, but there was zero engagement. No eye contact beyond a quick glance. No follow-up questions. No curiosity about anyone else. Most of the time, he just sat at his desk, perfectly upright, staring straight ahead. Not at his phone. Not out the window. Just forward. Like he was waiting for instructions. If the teacher talked to him, he'd respond politely, do his work efficiently, and go right back into standby mode. Over time, people stopped trying. He became background scenery. The quiet kid in the corner who existed but didn't participate in reality with the rest of us. And then came the fight. For context, big school fights weren't rare where I'm from. When tensions boiled over, it wasn't unusual for dozens of students to gather in some open area after classes and start throwing punches. Teachers would show up late, security would panic, and it'd be chaos for about 10 minutes before everything got shut down. This one was bigger than usual. Word spread fast and a crowd formed. People were hyped, shouting, filming, picking sides. You could feel that charged, stupid energy that only teenagers in a mob can create. No one expected the quiet kid to be there. He wasn't friends with anyone. He had no beef with anyone. He'd never even raised his voice before. So when we saw him walking toward the crowd, calm as ever, backpack slung over one shoulder, it genuinely didn't register at first. Then the fight broke out, and the quiet kid stepped in. What happened next didn't make sense. He didn't posture, didn't shout, didn't hesitate. He just moved. Fast, precise, like he'd flipped a switch. One guy rushed him and immediately went down. Another swung wildly and missed. Quiet kid sidestepped and dropped him. Within seconds, he was plowing through people like a wrecking ball at a demolition site. I'm not exaggerating when I say it looked choreographed. Clean strikes, perfect balance, no wasted motion, no anger on his face, just cold efficiency. He took down 5, maybe 6 guys on his own while everyone else stood there stunned, unsure whether to intervene or back away. Felt unreal, like watching one of those cheesy martial arts movies where the protagonist suddenly reveals he's been trained by monks in the mountains or something. Except this was happening in front of the gym, on cracked concrete, surrounded by screaming teenagers. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it ended. The quiet kid stepped back, adjusted his backpack, and walked away. No victory pose, no heavy breathing, no adrenaline crash. He calmly returned to the classroom, picked up his things and said, "Clear as day, bye." And then he left. That was it. No explanation, no acknowledgement of what he'd just done. The rest of us were left standing there trying to process what we'd witnessed while teachers and security finally rushed in too late to do anything useful. The next day, he was back to normal, sitting at his desk, staring straight ahead, silent, like nothing had happened. No bragging, no rumors from him, no change in behavior. If anything, he was exactly the same. People tried to talk to him about the fight, ask where he learned to fight like that, why he stepped in, anything at all. Okay, sure, bye. To this day, I still don't have an explanation. He didn't act like a tough guy. He didn't suddenly become popular. He didn't even seem aware that what he did was extraordinary. Honestly, I still suspect he was a robot, or a sleeper agent, or some kind of government experiment who briefly malfunctioned before returning to idle mode. Because I refused to believe a completely normal human being could exist like that, and then casually unleash absolute destruction before politely clocking out. Back in school, we had this science teacher who was universally known as that guy. Cool, a little eccentric, but in an endearing way, not in a creepy way. I want to be very clear about that up front because it matters later. His classroom was basically a sanctuary. The door was always open before school, at lunch, and after the bell. If you didn't fit in, didn't want to go home yet, or just needed somewhere to exist, his room was where you went. He ran this unofficial animal club that he clearly funded and managed himself. The school barely acknowledged it, but we had hundreds of animals. Hissing cockroaches, snakes, a 3-foot iguana, mice, chipmunks, chinchillas. You name it, it was probably in a tank somewhere in that room. Students were responsible for feeding them, cleaning cages, learning about them. It wasn't just fun, it was responsibility. A lot of kids who weren't good at academics absolutely thrived there. He also loved telling stories about his life. Stuff like the pigs he kept called Rasher and Bacon, going caving in places that sounded like something out of a survival documentary, sailing stories where everything went wrong but somehow worked out. Looking back, he was one of those teachers who actually lived and wanted us to know there was a world beyond school. He gave his own time freely. If you were struggling, he'd tutor you after hours without complaint. But, and this is important, he hated laziness. Not struggling, not failing, but not caring. If you had an attitude or couldn't be bothered, he'd call you out immediately. No sugarcoating, no babying. Which brings us to that kid. Every school has one. Smug, disruptive, always pushing boundaries, thinking he's cleverer than everyone else. He clashed with this teacher constantly because he couldn't get away with doing nothing. One day it came out that this kid had made a comic. A full comic book. It depicted the science teacher abusing students, boys and girls, while mocking him by using his little catchphrases. Someone found it and reported it. What followed was brutal. There was a formal meeting with senior school management. They brought in the kid's mother, and the teacher. This man, 6 feet tall, huge ginger beard, built like a brick wall, completely broke down. He cried, like actually cried. He said he'd never experienced anything so humiliating or devastating in his life. I still remember how wrong it felt seeing him like that. This guy who gave everything to the school, who trusted students enough to leave his door open, who built something genuinely special for kids who needed it, reduced to tears because of something so vile. The worst part? Even as immature teenagers, we knew how messed up it was. The entire student body turned on that kid overnight. And yeah, we were cruel about it, probably more than we should have been. But the anger was real. It felt like someone had attacked one of the few adults who actually cared. I don't remember what punishment the kid got. Detention? Suspension? Something like that. But I remember the damage lingered. The classroom door wasn't open as much after that. The stories slowed down. The atmosphere changed. Looking back as an adult, that's what sticks with me the most. Not the kid, not even the comic, but how easily one person's cruelty can shatter someone who was genuinely trying to do good. Man, this kid was strange. Not haha quirky strange, but the kind where even as a teenager you could tell something was a little off, even if you didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. I don't know if he had something going on mentally or emotionally, or if he was just deep in a phase that spiraled way too far. All I know is that at the time we didn't really know how to deal with it. He was really into Slipknot. Like really into Slipknot. Wore the shirts constantly, quoted lyrics like scripture, talked about them as if they weren't a band but a lifestyle. That alone wasn't unusual, lots of kids were into metal, but it kind of set the tone for everything else. At some point, he announced that he was Wiccan. Not in a casual, I'm curious about spirituality way, but in a very intense, declarative way. He talked about magic like it was a literal, measurable skill. Spells, transformations, powers, the whole thing. Most of us just nodded along because arguing with him felt pointless. And honestly, we didn't want to be jerks. We used to have Smash Brothers tournaments at a friend's place. Nothing fancy. Just kids crammed into a living room, trash talking, eating junk food, taking turns on controllers that barely worked. One time, he showed up and told us he could change his eye color at will. He closed his eyes, concentrated really hard, like veins popping, full focus, and then opened them triumphantly. He said, "See? They're lighter now." They weren't. They were exactly the same. No one really knew what to say, so a couple people just went, "Oh, cool," and we moved on. That was kind of the pattern with him. He'd make these claims, we'd politely acknowledge them, and life would continue. Another time, he tried to teach me how to create fireballs, like actual magic fireballs. He stood in my backyard explaining hand positions, breathing techniques, and visualization, insisting that if I believed hard enough, I could summon flame. He also carried around this book full of wolves, drawings, photos, spirit animal type stuff, and tried to determine what my wolf form was. Apparently, that was an important thing to know. Here's the thing, he wasn't mean. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't a bully. He was just weird, deeply weird. And because he wasn't hurting anyone, we tolerated it. Teenagers are pretty good at quietly categorizing people as odd but harmless and moving on. Until the incident. Because he was so into the Wiccan stuff, two of my friends, metalhead types, leather jackets, long hair, the whole aesthetic, decided to mess with him. In hindsight, this was unbelievably cruel, but at the time it probably felt like a dumb prank to them. They went up to him at school and told him they were demons. Not metaphorically, literally. One of them, let's call him Vince, apparently reached out to him from down the hallway and said something like, "Your soul is mine." He made these dramatic gestures, like he was ripping something invisible out of the kid's chest and forcing it into the ground. Full theatrics. Then they walked away laughing, assuming the whole thing was over. It was not over. Later that day, I get a knock at my door. I open it and it's the kid. He looks completely unhinged. Eyes wide, breathing fast, pale, shaking. In his hands, he's holding one of those sharp metal scissors. The kind that could absolutely do serious damage. He's frantic, aggressive, not yelling exactly, but talking fast, intense, panicked. He tells me he needs to find Vince. He needs to kill him to get his soul back. I'm frozen. Like, my brain just shuts off for a second because this has gone so far beyond weird kid stuff into something genuinely dangerous. I tell him I don't know where Vince is. He doesn't believe me. He says he's seen me with them before. He asks me if I knew they were demons. He's deadly serious. I tell him I didn't know. I tell him I don't know where Vince is. I tell him he needs to leave. I shut the door. I remember my hands shaking after. I remember standing there, listening, until I was sure he'd gone. Apparently, he didn't just go home. Supposedly, he was running around the neighborhood trying to find Vince, convinced that he'd stolen his soul. This kid was big, too. Not some scrawny little guy. So when someone saw him running through the streets holding scissors, it got reported. After that, nothing. He just disappeared from our lives. I don't know if he was institutionalized, moved away, expelled, or if his parents intervened and pulled him out of school. No one ever really talked about it again. As an adult, looking back, it's horrifying. At the time, it was surreal and terrifying and holy shit what just happened. But now I mostly feel bad for him. Something was very wrong, and a bunch of dumb teenagers pushed directly on it without understanding the consequences. No one expected that kind of break. No one thought it would escalate like that. I really do hope he's doing okay now. I hope he got help. I hope he grew up into someone stable and safe. But yeah, at the time, it was one of the weirdest, most unsettling things I've ever experienced. And it permanently burned into my brain how quickly fantasy and reality can collapse for someone who's already on the edge.